oxygen and carbon dioxide. And so if you look at these numbers, you'll notice, like, look up here, it says PO2 and PCO2. That P stands for partial pressure. So each gas exerts its own partial pressure, right? So if you look up, we have the atmospheric air, and like if you look up here where I'm kind of like circling, the atmospheric air is about, it has a pressure to it, and that pressure is about 760. Don't get hung up on that number; it's not a big deal. Um, but then within that, oxygen, the pressure of oxygen within that is about 159 millimeters of mercury. So oxygen has its own pressure. And so in the atmosphere, it's about 159 millimeters of mercury. So it all works by diffusion, going from higher pressure to lower pressure. If you look at the pressure out here in the air, it's 159. If you look at the pressure in your alveolus, like at the end of your lungs, it's 105. So the air, the oxygen wants to go from the outside, it wants to go into your lungs and into the alveolus. Then we're going to look, um, actually, to be more accurate, it works this way, right? Because the blood is coming, we're talking about deoxygenated blood that's coming back from the lungs. So the pressure of oxygen in that blood is even lower, right? Because that oxygen's been used up by the cells. And so now it's coming back up the vena cava, it's going back into the right side of the heart, and then it goes to the lungs. At that point, it's only like 40. So if you look here, the partial pressure of oxygen is 40. So here comes a pressure of 40. And inside here, inside the alveolus, it's around 105, 100, something like that, right? So as it's coming through, here's that deoxygenated blood coming through, and oxygen's moving into it. And as oxygen moves into it, the pressure starts going up. So now it's like going from 40, 50, 60, 80, 90, 100. So now it's going, so this right here is like the pulmonary arteries going out to the lungs, and here's the pulmonary veins going back to the heart. And so the deoxygenated blood has a low pressure, and so this is a higher pressure. So this oxygen is just crossing into the blood until they meet about equal levels. So this is gonna, this is 40, and it keeps crossing over until it's about 100. And if you look down here in your oxygenated blood, the partial pressure of oxygen is 100. Partial pressure, not meaning that oxygen has, it's only partial oxygen. That saying that that's the pressure of oxygen by itself. Forgetting about any other gases that are in your blood. So it's 100 here. So now all that oxygenated blood is going to your cells so that they can oxygenate your cells. And so that's kind of what this is showing down here. If you follow the oxygen as it's going by the cells, as it's going through the capillary beds and going close to the cells, oxygen is going to start moving into the cells because the pressure in the cells is only 40. But the pressure in the oxygenated blood is 100. So just greater pressure to lower pressure. That's all that's happening. So here it is 100, and it's going, 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40. It keeps crossing into the cells until the pressure kind of matches. Now it's deoxygenated blood coming back up the veins, heading back towards the heart, and it's 40 again. Passes by the lungs, it becomes 100. Goes down and passes by the cells, drops down to 40. Passes the lungs again, back up to 100. So that's essentially what's going on. It's, you know, oxygen is diffusing, going from a
You're frozen right now. I think you lost the internet connection.
Unmute.
All right, all right. Hopefully now that's it. Done. No more delays. All right, I'm back. So yeah, carbon dioxide is doing the opposite, right? It starts at the cell and it's trying to go out to the air. So as we're moving, the pressure is going to get is going to go from high to low. And so that's all that this is showing. So in the cell, and those numbers toggle between 40 and 45. So if you look at the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, it's 45 in the cell. Here in the oxygenated blood, it's 40. So here comes oxygenated blood, and oxygen is moving this way. And the more and the fact that oxygen's leaving the blood and going into the cells, that has no bearing on the pressure of carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide's got its own thing that it's looking at. Carbon dioxide doesn't care how much oxygen's in the blood or not in the blood. It only cares how much carbon dioxide's in the blood. So the pressure of carbon dioxide in the cell is 45. The pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood here is 40. So as this blood goes by, carbon dioxide's moving into it. So it's gone from 40, 41, 43, 44, 45, and now it's 45. So it wasn't like a big movement. You know, the numbers weren't as like big as far as the pressures. It's kind of slight, but it's enough. So in the oxygenated blood, carbon dioxide's 40. And then by the time it gets to deoxygenated blood, carbon dioxide goes to 45. And then here it is, 45, 45, and then it passes the lungs. And when it passes the lungs, if you look at carbon dioxide in the lungs, it's 40. In the blood, it's 45. In the lungs, it's 40. So the carbon dioxide just diffuses into the lungs, into the alveoli. So it's going from 45 to 40. And then, of course, if you look outside, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is not even 1. It's 0.3. So that carbon dioxide doesn't have any problem getting out of your, diffusing out of your body. So we've really got two sets of numbers we're working with. If we're talking about oxygen, the main numbers are like 140. Right? Oxygenated blood, the pressure is 100. Deoxygenated blood, the pressure is 40. When we're talking about carbon dioxide, where it's reversed now, and then we're talking about 40 and 45. So oxygenated blood is going to be 40, deoxygenated blood is 45. As it passes the lungs, it drops down to 40. As it passes the cells, it goes back up to 45. Just like that. Have any questions? I was probably just spending too much time explaining it, and I often make things worse by explaining it. The rate of gas exchange depends on a couple of things, which I've listed here. So a lot of people, so the one is the pressure of the gas. And a lot of people think that the air is thin in mountains, like there's less oxygen. It's not exactly true. The amount of oxygen at 10,000 feet is the same as the amount of oxygen here. It's the pressure of that oxygen. So you see here that at 10,000 feet, the pressure of oxygen goes down. So if you remember what it is in the body, oxygenated blood in the body is about, in the lungs, is about 100, 105, and outside it's about 159. So that's here in New Orleans. But at 10,000 feet, now instead of being like 160 and 100, like it's more like 110 and 100, so much closer. Right, so at 10,000 feet, it's around 110 millimeters of mercury. And if you go up high enough, eventually that number is going to move down to like 100. And so when it does, you'll breathe oxygen in, but it's not going to go into your blood because the pressure is going to be the same. Once the pressure gets the same, then it's not going to, or at the very least, as you go to higher elevations, the pressure goes down, so not as much oxygen ends up diffusing into your blood. I've been the first couple of days, I hung out at 10,000 feet a few times, and it's you can feel the difference. Like it takes you a few days to get acclimated to it. That's why they pressurize airplanes. Like right when you get around 10,000 feet, they pressurize the cabin. And then the other thing is the alveolar surface area available. And so this is the problem with some of the diseases. This is a problem with some COPD. For example, pulmonary fibrosis is an autoimmune disease. And so the body thinks that the lungs are foreign, or that the alveoli are foreign for some reason, and it starts attacking it. Your body's attacking yourself. So it starts attacking the lungs, and then the lungs, they respond by sclerotizing their tissue, making like scar tissue as kind of like a defense mechanism, right? But that scar tissue, that sclerotized alveolar tissue, is not going to let oxygen pass. So as time goes by, more and more of that alveolar tissue gets hardened. And so that would decrease the surface area available. So you're not going to have, you're going to be breathing in oxygen and breathing out oxygen. You're not going to have exchange.
Mr. Hart, when I moved up to Colorado a couple of years, and I was amazed that, because I was used to 80 to 100 down here below sea level as being normal, and up there 65 to 75 is normal. which is like, okay, that we're ready to start thinking about intubating them when they get that low in Louisiana. You know, and really you can tell a difference when you, like you said, you breathe in a lot faster, your heart's beating a lot faster to compensate for the, you know, the difference, because you don't have the hemoglobin to grab as many oxygen cells as you can. And, you know, that I've seen 19-year-olds come up there to try to ski and had to leave and go back down to Denver at 5,000 because they weren't compensating and their lips were blue, and, you know, they just weren't, they wouldn't increase their heart rate or anything to compensate because they came up too fast. And, you know, they always tell you, don't drink, don't exercise the first day, drink a lot of water. And of course, everybody drinks alcohol, they go out skiing and they fly right in, you know, and they, you know, so they always do the wrong things, you know, because you want to get up there and go skiing if you're a skier, you know. And we've had to, like, then that's the treatment. You send them back down to Denver, 5,000 feet, and you wait overnight, and then you come back the next day, and they're usually fine. You know, I thought that was pretty interesting, you know.
Yeah, it's that. I mean, that it happens to people all the time.
Yeah.
Where'd you end up going?
Breckenridge. We lived in Breckenridge, and then we lived in Denver the first time, and then the second time we went up, we moved to Breckenridge.
I usually go to Leadville.
Leadville, okay.
Yeah, like in the summers, because you know, like every 1,000 feet you go up in elevation, the weather gets 3.5 degrees cooler.
Yeah.
So even in Breckenridge, it's like nice and cool days in the middle of summer. It'll be.
I mean, it actually snowed for the 4th of July up there. You know, so I mean, it's crazy, you know, when you're so used to this lifestyle and you go up there and it's just so different. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good place to. Yeah, up at 10,000 feet, it's 35 degrees cooler than it'll be in New Orleans. So,
Right.
but also, yeah, like you're saying, yeah, and it's mostly people that come from the outside, just flying into Denver, and then they climb another 4,000 feet, and right. Why do I have this? This is just showing you the pressures we talked about. Like, you know, it's about 100 in your arteries, so that's oxygenated blood that's leaving the heart, and then deoxygenated blood that is on its way to the heart. It does have some oxygen in it, right? And there is a pressure. It does have a partial pressure of oxygen. It's just not as high, right? So there is some oxygen. And then this is kind of an extreme down here, showing you, because not all cells are contracting skeletal muscle. This is like the extreme. So when you're trying to get like when you're trying to get oxygen to your legs, and you're doing like a good walk or run or something like that, then it's really getting, the oxygen's really getting sucked up, right? So oxygen right now going to my hands, I'm not really doing anything. It's not, you know, it's getting used, but not like leg muscles would be used when you're like walking or running or something, right? And so you can see how it changes, right? The partial pressure, you know, it ends up dropping all the way down to like 35. So anyway, there's nothing that we're gonna talk about for that. These last 2 slides that we've been discussing have been talking about Henry's law, and that is that the amount of gas that's soluble in a liquid is dependent on the pressure of the gas and the solubility of the liquid. Right here, this bottom one. So the amount of gas dissolving in a liquid is proportionate to the partial pressure of the gas and the solubility of the liquid. The more pressure you have, the more gas will get. So we're talking about oxygen and we're talking about blood. So the more pressure you have in that gas, the more of it is going to get into your blood. And then, but now also, and we sort of talked about the pressure of the gas being better at sea level than it is at 10,000 feet, right? And so the other thing is the solubility of the liquid, right? The solubility of the blood. How accepting is the blood to hemoglobin? I'm sorry, how accepting is the blood to oxygen? And so another way to say that, instead of saying how accepting is the blood, hemoglobin, like how, the better that oxygen can stick to hemoglobin, that's being more soluble, because your blood's made of red blood cells. Red blood cells are just masses of hemoglobin. So we're really talking about how well oxygen sticks to hemoglobin. And these four things that I've listed here are different factors. Two of them are because we want them to happen. Two of these are things we don't want to happen. And if I just direct you over to this slide, what it's trying to say is that you want oxygen to stick to hemoglobin, so you want oxygen to be soluble in blood, but you also don't want it to. It depends. You want it to stick to blood, and you don't want it to stick to blood. There's a happy medium, right? So if we're looking at the pH of blood on this slide, this is normal blood pH of 7.4, and this is when you go acidic. So this red line's acidic, and this blue line is alkaline or basic. And you don't want either of these, because if you have your, and you see that, by the way, look at the blood, it's really there are really small differences here. It's all 7, right? You just went from 7.4 to 7.6. You're like, well, that's not a big deal. Yeah, but we consider that that's too alkaline. And so what's going to happen is that it's not going to release. The oxygen won't release. We need it to release. You need it to get off of the cell and make its way, off of the blood cells and make its way out to the interstitial fluid, and it feeds your cells with oxygen. But if it's too acidic, if you have acidosis, then you have the opposite problem. It's not grabbing on, it's not holding on to the hemoglobin as long as it needs to until it gets to where it needs to get. So it's breaking off early. So you need like this happy medium. So one factor is the pH, right? So the lower the pH, that means the more acidic. Lower pH means more acidic. Higher pH means less acidic. Lower pH decreases affinity, meaning that affinity means to like. So oxygen doesn't like hemoglobin as much when the pH goes lower. And so you could see that with ketosis or acidosis. Another thing is that if you have increased, and this is kind of related, if you have increased carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide usually doesn't use hemoglobin to get around the body. Hemoglobin is for oxygen to get around the body. So 99% of oxygen uses hemoglobin to transport throughout the body. Carbon dioxide, some of it will use hemoglobin, like a very small percentage, but most of it doesn't. But when there's more carbon dioxide in the blood than there should be, it starts jumping on and taking the spaces that oxygen should be riding on. So it starts jumping onto the hemoglobin in larger amounts, and that means that oxygen can't use it. So an increased carbon dioxide level means that oxygen levels are going to be lower. And by the way, the numbers were being mentioned, right? So, like saturation, usually they put a pulse ox on oximeter on like your finger, right? And it'll read whatever 99, 100, 98, and that's all fine. People have different opinions about what number you start getting worried about. What I'm seeing right now is 92. So once it starts dropping to like 92 or under 92, then you start doing something else to get that number back up to 92, right? So, I mean, again, it's just a number. It all depends. But what we used to do is like stick full oxygen. Oh, 92, stick the oxygen mask on there, 15 liters of oxygen, like do the whole thing, right? And then try to get it back up to 100. Now they've moved against that, and they're like, look, just try to get it back up to 92 and chill out. Put that little cannula on there and turn up the oxygen a little bit, 4 liters, and just relax, and it doesn't have to be 100. My brother-in-law, he's freaking out about, he's still not better, freaking out about the coronavirus. Like, it's psychological, right? He goes in and he gets tested and it's negative, and then he doubts. He's like, well, maybe I got reinfected, or maybe I got infected again, or I'm sure I have it. And at one point, he had bought an oximeter, a pulse oximeter, and he kept taking his blood, which is like a horrible thing to do, because inevitably it's going to drop down to 95 or something, right? Because he's whatever walking around, or if it gets a little cold, it gets affected, right? So he kept coming over and calling. He's like, it's been running 95. It's been running 95. I'm like, first of all, why do you even have this thing, right? Because if you have coronavirus, I mean, that's not how you detect if you have coronavirus, so I don't know. But 95 is like, no, finally I told him, look, just when it gets into the 80s, then call me up. So, crazy. So like 92 is about the level right now that people are paying attention to. Maybe a little more. Maybe some people are saying like 94, but so the first two, pH and increased CO2, are things you do not want to happen. That would be somebody that's maybe in ketosis. The second two, yes. So heat decreases the affinity, and you're like, well, that's not good. You want it to stick. You want the oxygen to stick to the blood. But it's think about it. That would be like a case where you're having fever. So when you have fever, you want your metabolism to go high. You need to take oxygen and get it to cells that are making ATP. You need to get oxygen to other cells that are trying to heal. So you don't want oxygen to stick to hemoglobin as much when it's getting to the cells that it needs to get to. And so heat has that benefit, in this case, beneficial. It's beneficial in this case. And BPG, biphosphoglycerate. You could just put BPG because that's what most people call it. But there's hormones that increase the formation of BPG, and the more BPG you have, the decrease, the less affinity you have. So this is the same thing. The more BPG you have, the more the oxygen is going to break away from the hemoglobin. And that's fine, because in this case, if it's HGH, testosterone, you're trying to like maybe grow. So you want the oxygen to break away. but it's like a controlled break, right? It's not that it's just breaking away everywhere in your body and never making it to your cells. No, it's making it to your cells, but then at certain areas of your body, you have higher levels of BPG, and that's going to cause the oxygen to break away and make it to the cells. So in that case, you don't want oxygen just sticking to your hemoglobin and circulating around your body everywhere. So those are 4 factors that affect the affinity of oxygen to hemoglobin, and these charts here are just nothing. They're just showing you. They're just, if you have to take pulmonology, you'll see a bunch of these curves, and you'll get sick of them.
Let me ask you this on the phosphoglycerate. Is that kind of like, like when people get conditioned, how the body learns where to send the oxygen to so that you don't have to work as hard? Is that concept? Or no?
Good question. I don't know the answer to. I mean, I would think yes.
I mean, it just sounded like maybe, just from some of the stuff you said that might be, because I know with conditioning, they said that, the body, when you're not conditioned, sends everything out all over, and that's why it works so hard. But once you get more conditioned, body learns to send it to certain areas like your muscles and your legs, and send it here and don't send it there. And then
right. Exactly. It's exactly what it does too. Like it gets, like they say, your body gets more efficient at delivering oxygen. And that's what it means. Like you have to know when to hold it and know when to fold it.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, that's all part of it. But I'm not sure, like I don't know like where BPG fits into it. I know it does. I just don't know where it fits into it. But 98% of oxygen uses hemoglobin, like 98.5%. The rest of it will just dissolve in plasma, so it's not really that big of a deal. So really, oxygen uses hemoglobin. Carbon dioxide will not. It has a few different ways, right? So I already made a mistake here. About 7%, not 75, about 7% of carbon dioxide is dissolved in blood plasma. And then about 23% will use different amino acids like hemoglobin. So if you remember from biology, an amino acid, it's got an amino group and a carboxyl group. And anyway, it's not like majorly important, but just saying that they form these things called carb amino compounds, right? So the carbon dioxide is attaching to the amino group of an amino acid, and it's getting transported that way. So it's attaching to different proteins in your blood, like hemoglobin, right? But the main way is this bottom one, the bicarbonate ions. So most carbon dioxide is transported in the blood as bicarbonate ions. So what it does is that the carbon dioxide will stick to the water part of your blood. And when carbon dioxide sticks to water, you end up with bicarbonate. So this thing, HCO3 negative, that's bicarb. So you might as well just get used to seeing it. And we'll talk about it in other chapters. But if you get stuck doing renal physiology, we're probably not going to get to it this semester. But if you get stuck doing it, you're going to see a lot of that. And then these right here, these H pluses, we call those protons. Hydrogen ions are protons. And we associate that with things that are acidic. We associate bicarb with things that it's like an antacid, right? I associate it with alkalinity, or like being a base or being alkaline. But anyway, so they the carbon dioxide binds with the water and forms this bicarbonate ion, and it uses that to travel through the blood. And then when it's done traveling, it goes back in the other direction. The bicarbonate joins with another proton, and it makes this again. This is like a balanced equation. There's like two H's on this side, and then if you go to this side, there's the two H's, right? So that's all it is. CO3, there's the CO2, and then there's the other O. So what I want you to get from that, what I want you to understand is that it carbon dioxide binds with water, and it's going to make bicarbonate. I mean, if you could kind of remember it that way, then so it's going to travel as a bicarbonate ion, and then it's going to break off when it needs to. I mean, getting the formula right, it's like not a big deal. But I would, you should, for your head, for your memory, you should know that this HCO3 whatever is bicarbonate, because you'll see it a lot, and you'll definitely see these protons. Oh, look at that. Did anyone have any questions? Or anything I didn't?
Test questions yet, or
no?
No.
Professor, I actually was thinking about some things. I'm just trying to put it all together from the beginning of how you started with the first chapter all the way through. I'm just trying to dissolve it and trying to just retain it and understand area effect of it. That's all.
Let me ask you guys a side question. Are you when we go over these things and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to ask a question on this and a question on this, and then you take your test, like, are you writing these down anywhere, like these questions?
Yes.
Yeah, you should be, and I can give you the questions again. It's not a secret, right? I'll open up all the tests for you to see. I've got no problem in that, because I want to use some of those questions for the final exam, right? So I want you to know, like, have a test bank of questions that I might ask. So all right, I think we're good here. And we don't have a whole lot of time to jump into the next chapter, so I'm just going to introduce you to it, but not really get super into it. But the review, yeah, so let me see. All right, so this is your digestive system. I won't spend too long on it. This is your digestive system, and it's formed from two parts. There's two parts to your digestive system. The first part is called the gastrointestinal tract, or GI tract. It's one tube, starts with your mouth, ends with your anus. So I'm going to follow it with the arrow. So the food comes in the mouth, goes down the esophagus. It's going to go into your stomach. Right, so here it is. I'm going behind the liver here and dropping into the stomach. This is all considered one tube, even though the stomach looks a lot different from the esophagus. It's one continuous tube. Some places it's stretched out. Right, so then the stomach. And what happens in the stomach is that the food's going to be liquefied. That's kind of like the main job of the stomach. You want to get that food physically broken down and liquefied. Then we're going to take that food and it's going to go into the small intestine. So you see all this stuff right here? That's all your small intestine. So from the esophagus into the stomach, into the small intestine, it's going around the small intestine. The small intestine is going to absorb all the nutrients and good stuff out of your food. So it's getting all absorbed right here. And then that food is going to move into the large intestine. So it's going to go from here into here. And this is all the same tube. This large intestine is taking back water. It's soaking up extra water. It's unliquefying your food. And then it gets stored in the rectum and then it's out. So from here to here is all one tube. So that's the gastrointestinal tract. So we're talking about the esophagus, but we're also talking about the large intestine. So then there's organs that are not part of this tube, but they help with digestion. So like up in your mouth, you have your salivary glands. They're producing saliva, right? So that helps. You're chewing up food. You need to get the food moist. And then there's some stuff that's in saliva too that kind of helps, right? And then your teeth and your tongue. So in your head, you've got your salivary glands, your teeth, your tongue. Those are accessory organs. They help with digestion, but they're not part of that GI tract. And then down here in your abdomen, you've got your liver and gallbladder, which is just like a little thing hanging out under, behind your liver. Your liver makes bile. We'll talk about that later. The gallbladder, it stores bile. And then you have your pancreas. Your pancreas is like behind your stomach. So if I wanted to see the pancreas, I have to like lift the stomach up and then there it is. The pancreas makes hormones. So we talked about it as far as it being an endocrine gland. It makes, for example, insulin, but it's also an exocrine organ. So it makes enzymes that break down food. So there's a bunch of enzymes that it makes. And the pancreas makes bicarbonate. So we just talked about bicarbonate. So what do you think bicarbonate, what's the function of bicarbonate when the pancreas makes it? And like you could just think of it to yourself, but it was a thing we just talked about. So it's an antacid. It makes your food less acidic.
All right, it neutralized the
Yeah, because here in the stomach the pH is really low. It's like 2, which is low. Like it's acidic. Like as you go down in numbers, when you go from 7 to 6, that's 10 times more acidic. When you go from 6 to 5, another 10 times. So if you just go like from 6 to 4, so you go from 6 to 5 and 5 to 4, right? Then what is that, 1,000 times 10? That'd be 100 times, right? And then if you go from like 6 to 3, that'd be 1,000 times more acidic. So each time you go down a number, it makes it 1,000 times. 10 times more. So the pH is 2 coming from the stomach into the small intestine. Well, that pH is too much. You can't have that kind of pH in your small intestine. It's going to burn a hole in your intestine. Same thing for your esophagus, by the way. Can't have that acid, that low pH in your esophagus. Your stomach's okay. Your stomach has a thick layer of mucus that lines the stomach. But the esophagus does not, and neither does the small intestine. So when the food goes into the small intestine, the pancreas is making antacid, sodium bicarbonate, and it's meeting the acid, and so it's neutralizing it. So the pancreas, the liver, the gallbladder, they are accessory organs. So you got three down in the abdomen, and you've got three up in the oral cavity. Yeah, why not? Because I'm not going to ask a question. This is going to be my last slide. It's got layers. There's different layers to the GI tract. So here we're talking about, this could be an esophagus, this could be the stomach, this could be the small intestine. It's whatever part of the GI tract. It has the same 4 layers. So the first layer is mucosa. The second layer is submucosa, which I'm looking for. Mucosa, oh, right here. Mucosa is the first layer. Submucosa is the second layer. So it's like this gray thing. Third layer is called muscularis, which is muscle. And fourth layer is called serosa. So if we look at the mucosa has 3 layers. There's epithelium, epithelial tissue. Underneath that is some connective tissue that we call lamina propria. And then there's MALT, that green stuff. Mucosa associated lymphatic tissue, right? So there's a lot of macrophages in that green area. So if some pathogen, you are swallowing it, let's say this is your esophagus and you're swallowing it and it gets past the epithelial tissue, it's going to get into the MALT. And then the phagocytes will go after it. But anyway, and then there's like a little layer of muscle here called the muscularis mucosae. So it's right here, epithelium, lamina propria, muscularis mucosae. This little layer of muscle here just gives it, like, if I look at the lumen, like the inside of my esophagus, it's flat. But if I were to look at the wall of my stomach, it's not flat. There's like pits. There'd be a bunch of holes, and there's pits that go down. And then if I were to look at my intestine, it's a bunch of like fingers like that coming up. Right. And so the shapes are slightly different. And so that's what that muscle does. It kind of helps form the shapes. So when you have like little finger-like projections, villi, like going out into your small intestine, this is what's doing it. And so here in the submucosa, you have mucus glands, and that's pretty much it. Blood vessels, nervous tissue, mucus glands. This muscularis, that's the muscle. So your whole GI tract is able to contract. You feel it in your stomach whenever you're hungry and your stomach's growling. That's what your stomach does when there's food in it. So that's all it's doing. It's being like, oh, hey, this is what I do when you put food into me, just to remind you, you should be putting food into me. And so it all moves. Right? Or sometimes you feel food move through your intestine. You're feeling these muscle layers contract. Right? And so in this case, one of the muscle layers is circling, and then the other one's like longitudinal, it's running up and down. So those are 2 layers of smooth muscle. And then serosa is whatever. Yeah, nothing to say about it. So anyway, that's a quick introduction into digestive system. I think we will probably leave it for next week. So I will do the review on respiratory system, and I'll go over any questions you want to go over for immunology, the lymphatic system. Right. So your exam will be lymphatic system again, and respiratory system. So any questions?